Hello, how's it going? Today I would like to discuss a topic that we've kind of been dancing around over on our other channel, the gaming channel, which some of you may know about. We played a couple of kind of older classic horror games and we started to wonder whether the modern generation would still be susceptible to things from the past. And by that I mean there's a lot of kind of classic games, for example, from back in the day, from like the kind of PlayStation era and stuff like that, that at the time scared the hell out of people. And if you showed it to a modern audience, they probably wouldn't be very receptive to it. A lot of the time you get stuff, when you show kids things these days, you know, kind of older games, a lot of the time they go, you know, why the hell would you have played that? It looks shite. And it kind of tears your heart in two a bit, because you thought you were kind of cool and hip and still kind of young, but you realise you weren't. So it was kind of some really old school 8-bit games we were playing, you know, kind of like 2D stuff from the kind of the NES and, you know, stuff from the kind of like early 90s basically in terms of the level that we're at. So we started to wonder whether it was actually possible to have a game that was scary within those confines. And that's another topic that we'll maybe discuss over there, but what that started to get me thinking about is whether classic horror could still scare. Now, I'd spoken to a couple of people recently and I'd kind of professed my love for the film The Thing, which is an absolutely awesome movie, and if you haven't seen it then stop watching this video and go and watch it immediately. The Thing is probably my favourite horror movie, and I make no qualms about it. I've mentioned this on various points, and someone had said to me the other day they'd watched it for the first time and they said that they thought the effects were crap and it wasn't very scary. And that really kind of like hit home with me, because I'd always considered the effects to be excellent. They're brilliant practical effects, and it started to make me think whether it was a generational thing. Now this person was younger than me, and I started to think, is it maybe a more modern generation looking back at these films because they're used to something newer, cleaner, perhaps more polished in certain respects. So The Thing is a very polished film, it's just obviously more of a product of its time. It started to make me think whether they could still be effective. So I guess to look at this you'd have to go all the way back to the, now I'm going to potentially muck this up, I didn't do French at school, I did German, so the Lumiere brothers, I believe, very kind of pioneering French brothers in cinema, and they did the kind of classic kind of 60-second short film that's very, very well known now. I don't even want to attempt the French title, but I believe the English title is Train Pulling Into Station. Now there's a bit of myth surrounding this film with the idea that when it basically documents a train coming to and from a station, and the idea was that basically people were so engrossed and amazed by it at the time that when the train was shown to be coming towards the camera, people jumped out of their seat. Now this is something that's kind of quite hotly debated amongst kind of critics and kind of film theorists of the years about whether or not this is myth or something that's been slightly embellished over the years. But either way, there's a number of examples to show that, you know, people that hadn't had particularly great exposure to film at the time were very, very affected by it. So this is something that I started to think about, and I look back at, I guess there's films like The Skull, for example. Now if you go back and look at that now, it's very, very classic of its era, but the main special effect that entire film revolves around is the floating skull. And when you go back and look at it now, there's not really any qualms about saying that it's shite. I mean, you can see the wires, it's quite clearly just a skull that's flying along, but at the time you can imagine that was quite effective. And that's another thing that leads into a point that I make as well about CGI. Because of CGI now, and it's not always effectively used, but there's been many cases where it's been well done, people have kind of seen everything now. And by that I mean, back, you know, when we were in the realms of visual effects, if something came about, there was limitations to it, but people always, and that's something that fascinates me as well, had to try and work out how something was done, you know? You looked at a visual effect and you thought, fuck, how the hell did they do that? And even looking at something like The Thing, the opening titles, which some people may not know, where it burns across to reveal the Thing logo, it's actually a black bin bag, I believe, in front of the characters, and they just lit it and let it melt away. So, I mean, stuff like that's genius. Stuff that you would immediately now jump onto the computer and do. Guys had to physically work that out back in the time. And there's an element of magic in it, you know. I mean, look at something like Jurassic Park. When that came out, no one had ever seen anything like this before, and it blew people's minds. So I started to think about this, and I've also met people as well that won't watch black and white horror films. Or, no, sorry, not just horror films, just films in general. Can't get past black and white. Even a modern black and white movie, I'd bet someone that couldn't watch Sin City just because of the format. And I think that's something that's strange as well, and again, it's possibly a slight conditioning of the generation too. But there seems to be this real inability with people to watch back to films at a certain point that were maybe very effective when they originally came out, and they really struggle to look past their age and see them for what they are. And I'm starting to wonder if this is something that will be ongoing, or whether, you know, we'll reach a point where people will actually start to have a hankering for this kind of more classical style. And I think CGI and the like have got a lot to do with that. People expect films to be a certain way and look a certain way, and I guess when they go back to these kind of classic horror films, for example, they have big trouble connecting to it. A classic example for me would probably be Hellraiser. Now, I actually think that the physical effects in that and the practical effects work really, really well. And I've actually shown a few people this recently, and they still find it just as effective today as I imagine many people would back then. So I guess it's certain types of films. I guess it's possibly the more kind of classical Hammer era type film. Some people just have a difficulty getting the connect with. And I guess at the same time, nostalgia is a big factor too. Had you seen that film when you were younger, you would maybe have the connect with it, and perhaps the fear that you had at a young age of watching that movie, and that would have maybe stuck with you. But I think now, people, you know, coming into, you know, the newer generations, looking back at them, don't have this connect, and all they see now is the flaws, and they kind of pull it apart, and it's probably very difficult to connect to them. So I guess my question to you guys is, do you think that classical horror movies can still be effective? And like I said, by that I mean, do you think, you know, can a modern audience still step into them and still connect with them the same way that people did, you know, when it was originally screened? And like I said, I think the visual elements of that have got a lot to do with it. Some people have issues with effects and stuff like that. Some of them are slightly cheesy as well, but generally speaking, I think if something's got a good story and it's carried well, I think time can quite often be on its side, and it, you know, it can avoid being dated. But that's, like I said, I'm going to start rambling now. What do you guys think? Do you think that kind of classical horror movies can still be effective today? And cite some examples as well. It'd be very interesting to look back at some classic examples. I know, for example, Mike, one of his favourite horror movies is the classic Haunting, the original Haunting movie. He's a huge fan of that, and that's actually quite an old film now. They tried to make a remake of it, and it was arse. It was just a very poor translation. So I think that's probably quite a good example of a classic horror movie that still stands the test of time. But anyway, what do you guys think? Leave it in the comments below, or throw a letter at me in the street tied to a brick, whatever your preferred method of delivery is. See ya.